I request everyone to please keep your cell phones on silent mode. We are starting with our lecture session. विद्या वितर्को विज्ञानम स्मृति तत्परता क्रिया यस्य ते षड्गुणास्तस्य नासाध्यम अतिवर्तते. विद्या, तर्क शक्ति, विज्ञान, स्मृति शक्ति, तत्परता और कार्यशीलता, ये 6 गुण जिसके पास हैं उसके लिए कुछ भी असाध्य नहीं है. इसी भावना को अपने हृदय में संजोए हुए आज हम सब भारतीय राष्ट्रीय विज्ञान अकादमी के सभागार में एकत्रित हुए हैं. हमारे बीच मुख्य अतिथि के रूप में विराजमान हैं प्रख्यात वैज्ञानिक प्रोफेसर के.एम. वेंकट नारायण, जो आज हमें अपने व्याख्यान द्वारा विज्ञान के बदलते परिदृश्य, उसकी संभावनाओं और चुनौतियों पर आलोकित करेंगे. With tremendous delight, I now request the Honorable Chief Guest, along with Professor Sanjay Puri, Vice President INSA, and Dr. Brajesh Pandey, Executive Director INSA, to join us on stage and grace today's magnanimous event. With profound commence this astounding lecture session, I cordially invite the esteemed dignitaries to ignite the ceremonial lamp symbolizing our odyssey towards enlightenment. दीप ज्योति परब्रह्मा दीप ज्योति जनार्दनः दीपो हरतु मे पापम दीप ज्योतिर्नमोस्तुते. With our hearts filled with gratitude, I now request Dr. Brajesh Pandey to extend the token of welcome to the Honorable Chief Guest, Professor K.M. Venkat Narayan. I again request Sir to present the honorary token to our esteemed Vice President, Professor Sanjay Puri. Thank you so much, sir. It is indeed my cachet and prestige to now invite Professor Sanjay Puri, Vice President, Indian National Science Academy, to embolden us with his words of wisdom and weave the tapestry of today's event with his welcome remarks. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, respected colleagues, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. I am representing the Indian National Science Academy, or INSA, to welcome all of you today to the INSA Distinguished Public Lecture, which is taking place here at the Academy Auditorium. We're really fortunate to have with us as chief guest Professor K.M. Venkat Narayan. He's a renowned scholar and an international figure in the domain of both medicine and public health. I mean, that's something that's sort of characterized his work over the years. We thank him for agreeing to come on our invitation and address today's lecture on a subject of obvious importance to all those of us who are in science, which is the evolving landscape of science in the 21st century, opportunities and challenges. So dear friends, of course, so let me state the obvious, that science has been the foundation of human advancement, and in the fast changing world of the present day, its importance is even more indispensable. So fora like this distinguished lecture series are a testament to INSA's ongoing efforts to stimulate discussion, encourage fresh perspectives, and bring to the table the great minds who can make us appreciate what the future holds for us in terms of scientific development. I'd like to also use this moment to extend a very warm welcome to all our fellows, our scientific colleagues, students, and all the guests who have joined us today. Your attendance graces this event and deepens our common purpose of advancing science in the service of society. I have no doubt that this afternoon, as the lecture title promises, will prove to be very mentally challenging and inspiring and leave us with several thoughts and visions to carry forward. With these words, I again welcome you all, and I'll turn the mic over to our distinguished guest of today.
No, we'll sit there.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think she
You want
has
to
to lead
introduce?
citation. And
Oh, okay,
Thank
okay.
you. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your thoughts with us. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine a world where the silent crisis of diabetes and non-communicable diseases touch millions yet remain largely unseen. Now imagine a mind illuminating this hidden landscape, transforming data into action, research into policy, and knowledge into hope. Today, we have the extraordinary privilege of welcoming such a visionary, Professor K.M. Venkat Narayan. Dr. Narayan is the Executive Director of the Emory Global Diabetes Research Center, Ruth and O.C. Hubbard Professor of Global Health and Epidemiology at the Rollins School of Public Health, and a Professor of Medicine and Endocrinology at Emory University School of Medicine. He is an elected member of the U.S. National Academy of Medicine, Foreign Fellow of the Indian National Science Academy, and a recipient of multiple awards. For decades, his pioneering work has traversed the complex terrain of diabetes, from prevention trials and youth-onset diabetes to understanding global variations in type 2 diabetes, shaping not just scientific thought but the health and lives of millions worldwide. With over 650 publications and more than 210,000 citations, Dr. Narayan's research is a testament to intellect, vision, and unwavering commitment. It is indeed a rare honor to welcome a scholar whose work not only expands the horizons of science but also inspires hope across nations. Please join me in giving a warm and enthusiastic welcome to Professor Narayan. Over to you, sir. I request the honorable guest to please move below to the audience. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ananya. Thank you, Professor Suri and Professor Pandey. It's a real honor to be here. And I see so many young faces, young students. It's my privilege to be talking to all of you today. As Ananya described, my career, I'm a physician by training, and my career has been in science for the past 35 odd years, and largely worked in the field of diabetes and related health issues. But over the years, I've also started thinking more broadly about science as it applies to humanity, particularly as we go forward in the 21st century. So I've chosen a title, rather pretentious, to try to map for you the evolving landscape of science in this century. The structure of my talk will take the following dimensions. I will do a little bit of frame setting, looking at the major impact that science has had on the health in the last century across the world. Second, in terms of the health patterns that we face today as a global society, whether we live in India or the United States or in China. What are the major challenges we are likely to be facing? And I'm going to pick one big challenge, which is my own area of work, which is diabetes. I will use that as a prototype of a contemporary challenge that's going to force us to think in terms of convergence of sciences. So science can no longer be, single discipline, particularly to solve contemporary problems. You're talking about the conglomeration of sciences, medicine, engineering, and humanities coming together. So I'm going to challenge you all to ask me questions as to where that needs to go. I'm going to use my own work as an example of India-US collaboration over the past 20 years. And I'm also going to make some arguments as to why expanding research in India is critical at this juncture in the country's progress. Then I'm going to finally conclude by looking briefly at the the big picture challenges and potential opportunities. And I will finally conclude by bringing all parts together and hope you will ask me some very difficult questions that I will not be able to answer. Firstly, one of the great successes of the past century has been this remarkable gain in life expectancy. In the case of India, when India became independent in 1947, I think the life expectancy was 29 years. And even the United States in 1900, the life expectancy was 49 years. So in the last 100 years, all countries of the world, with some exceptions, have gained life expectancy tremendously. In the US, for example, in a period of 100 years, they gained about 35 years of life expectancy. Countries like China and India are achieving that at less time, at half the time, or 1/3 the time. So there's been a rapid progress in terms of life expectancy, which is one great measure. And the biggest contributor to that has been improvements in infant mortality, maternal child health, and etc. Some years ago, the Centers for Disease Control in the United States, in the year 2000, did an analysis of what were the major factors that contributed to the US's decrease in deaths and gains of life expectancy of 35 years. And they concluded that nearly 27 or 28 of those 35 years was because of prevention and public health. And these were the 10 major ideas, major areas that were declared as contributing to it. First, childhood immunization in general, motor vehicle safety, workplace safety, control of infectious diseases, declines in death from heart disease and strokes, safer and healthier food, healthier mothers and babies, family planning, fluoridation of drinking water, tobacco as a health problem. These 10 areas, and even when you map India, I think many of these are going to be important. And many of these are a combination of scientific knowledge, technology, and very importantly, organization and legislation. All of them play a role here. That's something to remember. So when you look at the map of mortality across the world, there's a project called the Global Burden of Disease, which is run by University of Seattle, in University of Washington in Seattle. You can go to their website. It's called the Global Burden of Disease. You can map down the disease burden of any country, India included. And what this is basically showing, literally in the last 30-year period, from 1990 to 2025, the major changes in the leading causes of death worldwide. When you look at 1990, a lot of factors like lower respiratory infection, diarrheal illnesses, neonatal disorders, tuberculosis were all very important, and particularly in countries like India, they were very important. But as you go forward towards the year 2000, 2010, 2020, increasingly, thankfully, we are defeating a lot of the infectious diseases, a lot of the deaths due to diseases of poverty, and we are now, on the other hand, we are acquiring newer diseases, heart disease, strokes, cancers, diabetes. These are becoming much more common, what you collectively call them as non-communicable diseases. When you look in terms of the burden, the kind of leading factors contributing to global disability, The problem with non-communicable diseases, unlike infectious diseases, is that they're not instant killers. They impose upon humans loss of quality of life and increase in disability. So when you look in terms of disability-adjusted life years, the leading contributors are in this list here. High blood pressure, tobacco, alcohol use, household air pollution, diet low in fruits, high body mass index, high fasting glucose, childhood underweight, still a major problem in India. 27% of our children in India are born underweight or below desirable birth weight. Physical inactivity and, and diets high in sodium. So you can look at this list. Many of these things are related to our contemporary lifestyles. And if you go through that list, I'm sure each one of you will identify somebody very close who has several of these problems, including yourself. So this is something worth paying attention to. In the case of India, as many large low and middle income countries, which India is one of, there is this challenge of a dual burden. I mean, when you look in terms of the total number of diarrhea cases worldwide, childhood diarrhea, India tops the list as one of the leading causes. But also when you look at the total number of people with diabetes, once again, India is huge. So while many of the high-income countries have made that transition, the epidemiological transition, countries like India have a dual burden to deal with. And again, that's represented in the two types of Indias, the rural India, which still is about 65% of the country, and then increasingly the urban metropolis India. Not to forget, there's a third India which often gets missed, which really is the urban slums in India. And again, you can find this in Delhi, you can find this in Mumbai, you can find this in Chennai, any of the major. So India today is dealing with multiple complexities. On the one hand, a rising middle class, 300 odd million people, large rural population, and everything in between. So it really is a huge country. It's the world's largest country in terms of population. 50% of Indians are below the age of 30, which is a great demographic advantage if it is utilized well. But it also brings major challenges to the fore, and for which science becomes extremely important. So when you look at the leading risk factors for mortality globally, there is a convergence beginning to happen. The top 10 risk factors, high blood pressure, tobacco, high blood glucose, physical inactivity, overweight and obesity, high cholesterol levels, alcohol use, childhood underweight, and indoor pollution, those 10 factors are common across the world, whether it's a high-income country, low-income country, or a middle-income country, but their order differs. So in this sense, what the 21st century is doing, it's uniting the world in terms of health challenges, as an example. And I believe that will be true for many other challenges, whether it's in astrophysics or in chemistry. I think the world is coming closer together in one sense. We have to start paying attention to that possibility and the opportunities that offers us. This is where I like to believe that the future of science, at least in health, is this whole idea of convergence. Convergence of problems, but also convergence of disciplines. There's not without reason why IIT Kanpur would start a medical school, or IIT Madras would start a health and engineering department, or the Indian Institute of Science would start a medical school and a school of public health. This is a century of convergence, and where sciences, and I use sciences plurally, engineering, medicine, and humanities. Humanities cannot be forgotten. And again, I know there are a number of you from Amity University. I'd like to talk to you all about the role of humanities, how that should be brought into the fore. I think all of these are going to be important to come together. So now I'm going to use my own area of work briefly, that of type 2 diabetes, just to show the kind of research we have done, the value of US-India collaboration to uncover certain ideas. Type 2 diabetes is an ancient disease, but it's meeting a 21st century lifestyle and environment. Just look at there. It's been described by the Egyptians, the Romans, the Arabs, and the Indians in ancient times. And because I'm here in India, I thought I should pick a quote from a 6th century Indian Ayurvedic textbook, Charaka Samhita, who describes it as there are two forms of diabetes, called madhumeha. Madhu is honey, honey urine, madhumeha. One associated with emaciation, dehydration, sorry for the spelling mistake, polyuria, which means excessive urination, and lassitude, which means, lethargy or lack of energy. And the other one, stout build, gluttony, obesity, and sleepiness. What we today call as type 1 and type 2 has been described by observation 1400 years ago. The difference, of course, is today, given the technologies we have, we are able to better understand the processes much more accurately. But these physicians did it by observation. A student of mine many years ago, an anthropology student, she did some research, and she went into the word diabetes and found 25 words in the Sanskrit language which related to diabetes. So this disease was not rare in ancient times. It was there, but in selected communities and in small numbers. What we are today seeing is a very big difference. And this is where the Pima Indians of Arizona are a very important population to understand in the context of science, of diabetes. I spent 4 years with the National Institutes of Health, who have a very large research program with the Pima Indians. The Pima Indians, they live in Arizona. They are established to be a pre-Columbian migration to the Americas based on DNA evidence from skeletons. They probably migrated somewhere from Central Asia about 35,000 years ago. They settled in the banks of the Gila River they first came into the Americas, crossing the Bering Land Bridge into Canada. Then they came into what is North America today. And then they came and settled in the banks of the Gila River in Arizona. A small group of them went to Mexico. So the group that settled in Gila River near Arizona in a place called Zacaton was the population we studied. So in this population, they lived a fairly sustenance economy. The river was flowing. They had their own little agriculture, similar to many parts of India, if you like, in older times, even 40, 50 years ago, when I would visit my grandfather in Tenkasi, in Tirunelveli in South India. The river would be flowing. A lot of civilization was around it. There was a temple, there was a mosque, there was all kinds of, interesting local things where people lived a sustenance economy. Festivals were celebrated. Sweets were eaten at festivals or when visitors arrived, not on a daily basis. Food was fairly less diverse. In South India, in Karnataka, you ate Karnataka food. In Tamil Nadu, you ate Tamil Nadu food, etc. But let's come back to the Pima Indians. Till about 1930s, late 20s, 30s, they had studied the population. Jocelyn of Diabetes Clinic, of the Boston Diabetes Clinic, had visited, checked all the case records, because they used to have the Indian Health Service, which was universal health care for the Pima Indians, the Native American tribe. They didn't find much diabetes until the 1930s. And then in the early 1960s, there was this idea that the Pima Indians had a lot of rheumatoid arthritis. And the theory was desert people may be at risk of rheumatoid arthritis. So the NIH initiated a survey of rheumatoid arthritis in the Pima Indians, the reservation, all the Pimas living in the reservation. And the person who was one of the the investigators was Dr. Peter Bennett from the UK, who was a trainee young fellow rheumatologist. In the course of doing a pilot study to do a formal survey of rheumatoid arthritis, Peter Bennett discovered that 50% of the Pima Indians, even before the age of 45, had glucose in their urine. And here was a rheumatologist who shifted his attention. He says, now in the full survey, let's do what's called a glucose tolerance test. A glucose tolerance test is done to diagnose diabetes. Your regular glucose might be normal, but when you're challenged with 75 grams of glucose, for a normal person, your body will be able to bring your glucose down to within certain limits, but a person with diabetes will not be able to do that regulation. So he initiated the oral glucose tolerance test. And the reason I'm telling you this story, here was a rheumatologist, trained rheumatologist, who shifts his attention to diabetes and ends up becoming one of the leading diabetes figures in the world. Keep this in your mind. In science, it's the serendipity and the opportunity that might take you to a path you have never planned. So don't believe that you have planned your idea. keep an open mind to where the opportunities are. So then they found 50% of the Pima Indians by age 45 had diabetes. Something had happened between 1930 and 1960, and the only thing that had happened was the building of the Roosevelt Dam, the river went dry, the Pima economy collapsed, they started getting, depending on federal subsidy, on metropolitan foods, everything changed, okay? And all of the diabetes is what we today call type 2, and they also noticed that the community had become extremely obese. This gave the world, in the early 1960s, a theoretical framework for studying diabetes. The concept was, if a population is genetically susceptible, they did not know what that meant, but they proposed, the body develops what's called insulin resistance, where the insulin is a hormone that regulates glucose. The body produces insulin, but the insulin is unable to act. That's okay. Insulin acts at several levels. It acts on the liver, it acts on the muscle, it acts on the peripheral tissue. So the body develops insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is promoted by obesity, physical inactivity, and age. And because there's insulin resistance, to control glucose, the body has to pump more and more insulin. And that pancreas gets tired. And there is a failure of the beta cell of the pancreas, which is the one that produces insulin. And then diabetes develops. This was the model, theoretical model. And this is another thing that I want to introduce to you. Science, half of science, we think science is a systematic and objective process, but a large part of science starts from a paradigm of theory. So this was a theoretical basis. And when there is a paradigm of theory, keep your mind open to questioning that paradigm, because at certain times, a new paradigm might be necessary. And as I take you through the talk, I'm going to argue that for diabetes in India, a new paradigm is going to be required. Okay, that's the reason why I want to introduce this idea. Today, this is a Lancet editorial where diabetes is described as a defining disease of the 21st century, and not without reason. These are recent data from a thing called the NCD risk collaboration. The total number of people with diabetes worldwide today is estimated at 828 million. And India leads the pack with 212 million, followed by China, 142 million, and then the United States, about 45 million. So India roughly contributes to a quarter of all the diabetes cases worldwide. And you should ask the question, India is, more populated, just about the same population as China, but why does India have more diabetes than China as a rate, is a question you should be asking. The other thing, over the years, Indians have migrated to many countries, and in several countries of the world, US, United Kingdom, South Africa, Norway, Singapore, etc. In every country, they've noticed that the Indian diaspora has had a higher proportion of diabetes, risk of diabetes, what we call prevalence, what proportion of the population has diabetes, compared to the native local population. So the idea has always been Indians going abroad acquire a different lifestyle from abroad, and that is what is causing the risk. Indians are at risk, okay? So everybody was looking at diabetes in India with the paradigm of insulin resistance. That was happening, and you can read literature in UK, etc. That was a common thing, okay? Even in India itself, in 1972, 1.5% of the population had diabetes, and now very recent study in 2015, now there are studies beyond that, 25% of cities, this is Chennai, have diabetes, and even in rural areas, the prevalence is increasing. So India in general, every part of India, people often ask the question, is North India different from South India? I can tell you, no, it's not. We have also studied Karachi. And in general, it's a subcontinent problem. So there are subtle differences, but overall there is something big happening. And this is a study done by one of my PhD students. She compared diabetes in the United States, Indians born living in the United States, with Indians living in Chennai, India. And what she found, overall, for the first time, that urban Indians had a higher prevalence of diabetes than Indian Americans living in Chicago and California. Okay, there are several reasons for it, true for men, true for women. But what is striking is compare the Indians' risk with the US risk, much, much higher. Okay, so Indians are overall at risk, and today urban Indians probably are at higher risk than Indians living in the United States or UK, for example. Why? This is the center that I established. I started in 2007 when I was recruited to Emory, started as one faculty. Now we are 160 faculty, interdisciplinary across the campus. We got established as a university center 3 years ago. And the disciplines, all the way from molecular biology to physiology to epidemiology, clinical trials, molecular, economics, policy. It's the entire spread. And plus, we also collaborate with Georgia Institute of Technology, etc. So it's an example of a multidisciplinary institute. In India, over the last 17, 18 years, we've established partnerships with several leading institutions. And these are all funded partnerships. Currently, I personally have NIH grants of almost $50 million in collaboration with India, with All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Center for Chronic Disease in India, Public Health Foundation of India, the Madras Diabetes Research Foundation, Ashoka University, St. John's Medical College, my alumni, IGIB, which is where Anurag Agarwal used to work, then Asian Institute of Gastroenterology in Hyderabad, IIT Madras, and NIMHANS. You'd wonder why NIMHANS? Because diabetes accelerates dementia very rapidly. So, and all of these are funded partners. We have a very strong network. We work very effectively. And our work has stretched across what we call the 4 pillars. And this, we published a strategic framework for defeating diabetes in India. It's downloadable it's a journal of the Indian Institute of Science. I've been happy to send a copy to all of you. So we are looking at etiology, which is what is the cause of diabetes. Precision medicine. I was telling Dr. Pandey that 2 people eating the same food, their glucose responses can be very different. You might eat something and I might eat the same thing, our responses will be different. So that's where precision diabetes, can we get more and more precise in terms of defining diabetes for each individual, or for each groups of people. Implementation research. When I worked at CDC, I discovered that although the US was spending at that time $130 billion for managing, at that time, 12 or 13 million people with diabetes, only 5% of people with diabetes had good control of glucose, blood pressure, and lipids. So there was a huge gap in implementing science into practice. And this is where an MBA that I did helped me. I was able to think, but the question in my mind was, if I was working for Toyota and I invented a new model and was unable to market it, I would be a failure. So why are we not doing that in health? And believe me, a lot of health is not just great doctors. It's about the marketing and the organization of healthcare that becomes important. And I think this is where bringing in engineers, your business intellectuals are going to be important to deliver health for all. It can't just happen through single doctors. Even as an individual patient with diabetes, you're managing 10 drugs. You're having to manage your eye, your feet, your kidney, your heart. The organization is what is required. It's not just great doctors. That's something that I want to mention to you. Then health policy is another area we do some work on. And in addition to that, over the last 20 years, we've had considerable exchange of fellows. We've had almost over 250 international fellows, mostly from India, come and spend between 3 weeks to 4 months at Emory University. And the majority of them have returned and become investigators in the system here. And similarly, we believe today that we require a bilateral kind of a training model where we have had about 40 doctoral and postdoctoral fellows from the United States come and spend up to a year in Indian institutions and then go back. And this young network, and this is why I appeal to all of you, the future of the world is going to be not just your institution, but the networks you develop. You might be sitting here, but your PhD mentor could easily be a Nobel laureate in Japan or in China or wherever. You're not limited in space anymore. Keep that in mind. We've established one of the largest cohorts for studying diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Now it's also extending to dementia. It's called the CARS cohort. This started with just $1 million way back in 2008, but now has a total budget of $50-60 million. That's how things grow. And these are published. You can again download it. What a cohort is We take a representative sample of Delhi and Chennai in this case, people who are healthy, people with disease, and then we follow the whole population annually and biannually with blood exams. We map their mortality. We find out what are the factors that cause disease in a population. What's the natural history of disease in a population? What are the risk factors? So one thing we did proper sampling. The other thing we did, we started young. We started at age 20 because you want to study disease happening early. And the third very important thing that we did, something for you to remember when resources are limited, we stored a lot of samples in the lab so that when money becomes available or questions become available, we can go back and do it. If we had initially said we are going to do whole genome sequencing, we wouldn't have had money. But because we saved the DNA, we were able to do it. That's something to remember in science. Always design your study based on what is ideal and then make the compromises rather than the other way around. Because when you start with limitations in mind, your study design, you end up becoming short-sighted. If you want, you need to take a long-sighted view of it. And this is our CARS cohort, just to tell you that almost 16,000 people initially sampled in 2010, another 14,000 people in 2015. All of these people being followed up every 2 years with blood exams, and every year there's a field workers going to their house and finding out what disease they had, who's died, etc. And the retention of this cohort has been tremendous. 95% of the people have had at least one follow-up, 90% have had at least 2 follow-up, and at each exam, at least a 75 to 80% turn up. And as I'm showing here, although we started with a kind of a fairly tight budget, and we did some basic things, over time now we've added subclinical imaging of the heart, the liver, the brain, the carotid. We've added multi-omics like genomics, metabolomics, epigenomics, protein-based biomarkers, wearables. I mean, to measure sleep, we use wearables. To measure physical activity, we use wearables. Now we want to use wearables for measuring blood pressure, for measuring glucose, for measuring food, dietary, for example, those kind of things. So we're using a lot of technology. And then we're going, so looking deeper into cardiovascular disease and also into brain imaging and oculomics. I mean, there are studies that show by taking a picture of your eyes, the vessels of your eyes, we can predict who's at risk of diabetes, predict who's at risk of cardiovascular disease, predict who's at risk of dementia. This is where artificial intelligence also becomes important. Whole genome sequencing, extremely important for a population like India, because you don't know what the rare genes are. If you're constantly relying on reference, for GWAS from other countries, you need you need whole genome sequencing here. We recently published this last week in Nature Medicine, the lessons from the CARS cohort. That's the link. Again, it's publicly available. I welcome you all to read it. It summarizes 20 years of findings. Just to give you a few snippets. The lifetime risk, a person aged 20 years in India, an average male has a 55% probability of developing diabetes during his lifetime, and an average female, a 65% chance of developing diabetes in her lifetime, extremely high relative to global standards. If you're obese at age 20, a male's risk is 76% to develop diabetes in his lifetime, and a woman's risk is 72%. Again, showing you that very early in life, your risks are high. The other important thing in Indian population is what we call normoglycemia, where your fasting glucose is less than 100, or your 2-hour glucose is less than 140, or your A1C is less than 5.7. People, on average, stay in the normoglycemic area for about 40 years, 35 to 40 years. But once they develop prediabetes, in the Indian population, they seem to very rapidly go on to developing diabetes. Like within 5 to 7 years, they go on to develop diabetes. And the question is why? Like whereas in a white population, that number is more like 15 years. So in India, it's more rapid. So we should ask the question, why is that the case? And that's where I'm going to take you to soon. So the dominant view of the literature, and the problem with literature is, I remember studying medicine in India. And in those days, amoebic liver was very common in India. And there was a thing called the amoebic liver abscess. When you do an aspiration, you get the abscess. And the textbook described the amoebic liver abscess as anchovy sauce. And all medical students would recite anchovy sauce in an exam to pass. But nobody has seen anchovy sauce in India. So we learned something by rote. And the metaphors and the analogies were from somewhere else. This has been a problem for a lot of science in India, where a lot of the dominant theories have been developed in other populations. And we have gone to these international meetings or international textbooks and reproduced it. And I think that's a problem when you do it. And I'm going to take you through the case of diabetes as to why that is dangerous. Number one, the dominant view was diabetes in India is because Indians are genetically predisposed, maybe. The second, they were insulin resistant. That was the dominant theory. Third, they have high visceral adiposity. Some years ago, I took on the challenge of examining, is this true? Let's examine it. I mean, maybe they are true. So as a scientist, you have to be questioning. You can't, just because a textbook says something, 50% of medical textbooks change every 5 years. The problem is we don't know which 50%. So as a scientist, you have to be skeptical. Skepticism is the most important quality of a good scientist. So in terms of genetics, I can tell you we know there are currently, this is a slightly older slide, probably about 1,500 SNPs, which explain about 20 to 25% of all known cases worldwide. Most of the major variants so far are common across the world. But in India, we don't have whole genome sequencing. We might find certain new variants. That's something to remember. You can use all the genomes. It doesn't seem to improve prediction so far. And I've done one of the largest trials of lifestyle intervention, getting people to exercise 30 minutes a day, modify your diet towards a healthy diet that showed that you can not only reduce your risk of diabetes, but even if you had the genes for diabetes, you still can prevent yourself from getting diabetes. Jocelyn once said, in diabetes, the genes may load the cannon, but it is always the lifestyle that pulls the trigger. So even if you're genetically predisposed, there are things you can do. That's something worth remembering. So genes doesn't seem to explain why Indians are at high risk, although maybe in the future we'll find out with more genetic research here. One area, there is some clues, is in the area of epigenetics. I mean, this was a study comparing white Britons with Indian Britons. And they found there were 5 particular genes which were associated with diabetes in both populations. But the methylation, which is epigenetic phenomenon, there was higher methylation in South Asians compared to the whites, suggesting that rather than fixed genes, methylation or epigenetic process, something that gets established in the womb or later in life, may be important to think of. So the other big question was, is it insulin resistance in Indian population, or can the population be deficient in producing insulin? This was a question that arose in my head 15, 20 years ago, simply because there were 2 observations that I came across. Firstly, if obesity and diabetes were like totally, congruent, the genes for obesity and the genes for diabetes should be congruent, but they're not. The majority of genes for obesity are insulin-resistant genes. The majority of genes for diabetes are insulin-secretory genes, and there is very little overlap between the 2, suggesting that, yes, they are very importantly connected, but they're different pathophysiological processes. That was one clue that I thought about. The second was this. I mean, this was a recent paper published in Nature Medicine last week. They looked at the genes related to obesity, but there were 266 variants that they found of the total number of genes, which were actually protecting the person from cardiometabolic diseases, from kidney disease, from diabetes, etc. And they called them uncoupling. There were other genes that were related to higher. So obesity overall doesn't explain. I mean, the question is what kind of obesity, where is your fat? Some genes may be protective, some genes may not be. So again, a danger of simplicity in science. The third is these data. One of the great things of the United States, and I can say it, is that the country has migrants from every part of the world. I mean, this was a research that one of my PhD students did. In fact, she was my first PhD student, Rina Oza. She looked at data on 38 million immigrants to the United States. Asked a simple question: what is your region of birth? And what is your level of obesity? And what is your prevalence of diabetes? And what she found, the African immigrants, not African native Africans, but African immigrants to the United States, and immigrants from the Indian subcontinent had the highest diabetes risk in the United States. When this line is important, what that line does, that line runs across the prevalence of diabetes among obese Europeans in yellow, and look at where the line crosses the Indians, the Southeast Asians, and the African immigrants. Your normal weight Indian, or your normal weight Southeast Asian, or your normal weight African immigrant has a higher risk of diabetes than an obese European. Again, obesity does not explain all of diabetes in India, and indeed, even normal weight people in India seem to be at risk of diabetes. The question is why? And this is where I did a direct comparison with my colleagues, comparing a population sample in Chennai, India, with Dr. Mohan and his group, with the Pima Indians in Arizona, and shown here are the fasting and 30-minute insulin. So when you eat something and you measure, within 10 minutes your body is producing insulin. That's called the first phase insulin response. What you see in that graph here, firstly, both the populations, the prevalence of diabetes was about 50% by age 55. Very high risk. I mean, 50% of people in Chennai age 55 and older have diabetes. And 50% of people in the Pima Indians have diabetes. But when you look at their insulin secretions, the Indians are secreting less insulin at fasting and considerably less insulin at 30 minutes. So there is a problem, we are not secreting insulin. And indeed, when you look at their glucose profiles, very different. Indians have high fasting glucoses, the Pimas have high 2-hour glucoses. And look at their obesity levels. The Pimas are 7 BMI units heavier and 25 centimeters larger in the abdomen, but still the two populations have the same. So obesity does not explain. And this clue that insulin secretion may be a problem is important to take. So this is where it's time, we proposed, it's time to consider type 2 diabetes not as one disease, but multiple diseases. And this was I constructed the idea theoretically and published it in 2015 or 2016, I can't remember, just based on the comparison of Indians with Pima Indians. And then some years later, this group from Scandinavia, where they had a large data set, they analyzed their data and they came up with 5 different types of diabetes. Type 1 was one, and the type 2, they came up with 4 different varieties. One of them was insulin deficient, one of them was insulin resistant, the other was aging related. And this study now has been replicated in, 50 or 60 different populations, including in India. And these are recent data from our CARS cohort, which is hasn't been published yet. And what we are finding in the CARS cohort is 78% of type 2 diabetes in Indians is insulin deficiency, not insulin resistant. And 66% of prediabetes in Indians is because of insulin deficiency. And the other striking thing is this. When you look at these people with diabetes and prediabetes, number one, diabetes and prediabetes increases the risk of mortality in the future. For example, that's what this slide shows. But look there, the severe insulin deficient form increases the risk of mortality by 3.3 times compared to normal people, normal glucose, or you're losing about 18 years of life expectancy. So, so somebody developing diabetes at age 40 is going to die 18 years younger than somebody without diabetes. So the insulin deficient variety, not only is it more common in India, it is also a more serious disease in terms of its thing. And how you manage an insulin deficient variety is very different. You can't tell somebody with a BMI of 22 to go and lose weight. It doesn't work. You can't, so I think we need to start thinking more aggressively. And this is a study comparing the 5 different types I mentioned in Assam, India, in Pune, India, and in Sweden. And what you see there, in India, the most dominant variety is shown in green, which is the insulin deficient variety, whereas in Sweden, what is seen is in red, which is the insulin resistant or the obese variety. So again, telling you that research in India is important to understand India's own problem. And this is again a study of several different cohorts in the US, looking at ethnic differences across these different phenotypes of diabetes. And that one called South Asians, again, we might think the Indians, Pakistanis, they're all from the same genetic stock, if you like it or not. And so what you're seeing there is that in South Asians, the dominant variety is the insulin deficient part. Okay, that's what you compare to the others. So a colleague of mine, Jitin Varghese, who happened to be an engineer from IIT Madras, came to Emory to do a PhD in nutrition, and he's now working in diabetes. So he compared all of the phenotype studies that had been published and did what's called a systematic review. You put it all together. And his question was to compare Asians with non-Asians. And this is what he found. Across the studies, I think at the time he did, there were 44 studies. The 5 phenotypes were found in all ethnic groups. So there isn't an Indian phenotype or a Chinese phenotype. There are phenotypes. The difference is the frequency. In India, there is more of the insulin deficient phenotype. In Sweden, there is more of the insulin resistant phenotype. So the phenotypes are there everywhere. It's just that the frequencies are different, which means science is also generalizable. But what is striking is this. When he looked at the data closely, comparing Asians with non-Asians, number one, Asians with diabetes had higher A1C, means they had more serious disease. They had lower BMIs. Their age of onset of diabetes is younger. And they were generally secreting less, regardless of the phenotype. They were secreting less insulin, and they were not more insulin resistant. So again, what you find in India might be more applicable to 85% of the world, which is the low and middle income countries of the world. So that is why more research in India is essential, and in countries like India, China contributing to research. On Sunday, I'm going to be giving a talk in Hong Kong, looking at about Asia, the diabetes in Asia. So just to summarize here, the diabetes and pre-diabetes phenotypes, they may differ in etiology, pathophysiology, natural history, complications, prognosis, response to lifestyle and therapeutics. So it's important to start thinking about different phenotypes. They may differ in frequency across age, gender, race, ethnic groups, geographical locations. For example, the insulin deficient phenotype may be more common in non-European populations and in LMICs. Asian populations may on average be more insulin deficient. Expanding this knowledge is going to be extremely important. And just quickly about visceral adiposity. These are data from the United States, several populations. Again, one of the great things with the US, we have multiple ethnic groups. So look at the square in red. Those are normal weight people. In normal weight people, high proportion of people have some metabolic abnormality, either a high glucose, low HDL, or high triglyceride. Among the whites, it's about 12 to 15%. But look at the South Asians. 50% of South Asians of normal weight have a metabolic abnormality. So, and these data are adjusted for visceral adiposity because the data and well measured using CT scans. So showing that visceral adiposity alone doesn't explain the difference. So what is causing it? We need to understand. There was a meta-analysis comparing visceral fat, subcutaneous fat, and liver fat, comparing white Brits with South Asian Brits. And what they found, South Asians generally had a higher risk of diabetes, were lighter in terms of BMI, had higher subcutaneous fat for men and no difference in women, had no difference in visceral fat, but had difference in hepatic fat. So South Asians have more subcutaneous fat, which may be harmless, but they have more visceral fat, which is harmful. Okay, liver fat. So again, when you compare lean muscle mass, when you compare South Asians with Europeans, even at very young ages, South Asians have low lean muscle mass. And why is that the case? We need to understand that better. This is an interesting study done from New Delhi. It's called the New Delhi Birth Cohort, famous study. The red line is the glucose trajectory till age 25 of children born low birth weight, or whereas the green one is children born normal birth weight. What you're seeing is children who are born low birth weight or stunted seem to have a higher risk of diabetes and high glucose level even by age 25. This may be where the epigenetics becomes important, maybe why maternal child nutrition becomes important for the Indian subcontinent overall. So taking all this, at that time when they published the paper, they said that those who went on to develop diabetes became obese relative to themselves. But I think the research that we have done in the last 15, 20 years adds another hypothesis. Those that went on to develop diabetes may have poorer beta cell function to start with, or some problem in their pancreas to start with. And indeed, when you compare the Indian organs, these are autopsy studies, with the French, in general, our organs are smaller, whether it's the pancreas, the kidney, the heart, etc. Why is that the case? We need to ask the question. And these are preliminary data, so don't make too much out of it. We got 5 pancreases of road traffic accident victims in Hyderabad. It was not processed for this particular question, but we compared them with pancreases in the United States across different BMI. And what the clues we get is, at least in these 5 pancreases, the overall area of the islet cells, which is the cells that secrete insulin and glucagon, they seem to be much smaller in the Indian pancreases, and also the distribution of cells seem to be different on histochemistry. We don't know. This is where we have set up a pancreatic biobank in Hyderabad at the Asian Institute of Gastroenterology, the first one in Asia, and we believe this is going to reveal a lot. So our hypothesis for why are South Asians at heightened diabetes risk challenges the paradigm of the Pima Indians. We think Indians and South Asians start with an evolutionarily determined poor beta cell function or structure. We don't know what it is. There's also low lean muscle mass. These 2 endowments have set the risk. And then on top of it, when you add the changes to lifestyle, which you put on fat in the liver and pancreas, very quickly you go on to develop diabetes. Yes, you have to adjust lifestyle, but we also need to understand the basic pathophysiology, and maybe there's opportunities for stem cells to regrow islet cells. We don't know where it goes. So the other thing that we are facing worldwide is expansion of technologies, which is going to be extremely important for science. So artificial intelligence, we can use it to understand disease, risk factors, predicting disease, informing precise therapy, and maybe better delivery. AI models may be the way to solve a lot of delivery problems. We don't know. Expansion of therapeutics. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there were 2 drugs for diabetes. Now there are 13 classes. But the problem is the more newer classes are very expensive. And I want to give you one example. Even in the United States, some of the newer diabetes drugs are used less frequently, and there's huge disparities in their application. We did a little modeling of this thing called GLP-1 drugs, which is probably the best, greatest invention after the discovery of insulin 100 years ago. So we did a model. We said, if the GLP-1 drug can be made available and delivered to all the people in the world who need it, people who meet the criteria of obesity or diabetes, who would qualify for it, according to our modeling, you would reduce the obesity prevalence globally by half. So there will be about 500 million fewer obese people worldwide if this drug was available to everybody. And more than that, this is within a 5-year period, more than that, you would save 37.5 million deaths globally within 5 years. I mean, huge, massive. So the question is, how do you make this drug available? That's another problem for technology, for business, for science to solve, making drugs available and affordable to the populations. So now to the last few minutes, let me reflect briefly on some of the big picture challenges and opportunities. I mean, I want to offer to you that we are today in an era of globalization of science. No nation is going to be an island anymore. I mean, Mr. Trump might think that America is an island. It's not. I mean, America has to be global, and I stand here to say that. And I think the choice really is between cooperation or competition. And I want to offer to you that, yes, competition is necessary. You need to compete with yourself to get better. You need to compete. It's competition, it's human nature. But cooperation is equally important. And for example, what I've discovered across, when I look at all the 12, 13 institutions in India that we collaborate with, across the institutions, all of the necessary infrastructure skills are available, but in any one place they're not. And that's why collaboration and cooperation becomes extremely important. And increasingly, collaboration is going to be global. So start thinking about how you can collaborate globally. And I think that science is going to change more and more towards convergence and interdisciplinary approaches. So you might be trained in one discipline, but you better be sensitive to other disciplines. You don't have to be a master of all disciplines, but you've got to know enough. If your neighbor next to you is in a different discipline, please talk to him or her and learn something about it. Learn something about, you might be a biologist, learn something about physics. I think that's going to be extremely important. So I think interdisciplinarity, ability to communicate with other disciplines is going to be extremely important. I mean, some of the great people, I mean, insulin. Can anybody guess what specialty the person who invented insulin belonged to? I'll offer a prize for the person who guesses. What was that person? He's a physician, but pardon? Physician, but which discipline? What physician was he? Chemistry. Orthopedic surgeon. Okay? So again, there is no monopoly when it comes to science. You can be trained in one thing, but your contribution can be somewhere else. Always remember. Fisher, the greatest statistician, one of the last century, one of the great ones, was an agriculturalist. Okay? So, a lot of physicists today are contributing to fundamental understanding of genetics because they are bringing the methods. So think broadly. And the other thing is role of multiple funders and stakeholders. You cannot rely on just government to be funding. There's got to be private investment. There's got to be foundational investment. And every one of your studies, the way I tell my students, we get one grant, start looking for additional grants. That's the way, you're constantly in the move. And there are ideas. And the beauty of writing grants is it doesn't have to be boring because it forces you to think of new ideas, forces you to think of new collaboration. Why would somebody working in diabetes reach out to somebody in the brain center and say, let's put together a grant on diabetes, the connection between diabetes and dementia, and we get $22 million in collaboration with NIMHANS in India. So that's the way you have to move more and more towards plurality of funding, interdisciplinarity. Communication, public communication, extremely important, especially with democratization of information. Science cannot live in silos in your own labs. The findings of science have to be communicated. India is probably the only country in the world which has scientific temper in its constitution. And you are not going to have scientific temper unless the public has the scientific temper. And I believe it's the role of scientists to reach out to the public and to promote the idea of scientific temper, promote the idea of scientific debate in public, communicate in a way that anybody can understand. Yes, your paper is written for a specialist journal, but can you take out from that paper those 3 important points and tweet it in a way anybody can understand? You might be working on gravitational waves or the latest genes. You still can communicate to a person with simple intelligence. How do you do that? That's going to be extremely important. And you have to communicate upwards. You have to communicate to the politicians, you have to communicate to the policymakers, to the funders, to your own peers, and each time the communication has to be different, and we have to do it. Building trust to science is going to be extremely important, and I mentioned to you, there's a lot of distrust about science happening, but you can't counter it by calling it fake news. If somebody is putting it out, I think we have to counter it with positive. You don't have to pick and fight with every fake news, but we can put out the right news and hopefully, somewhere along the line, something will win. And I think let's talk about it if you want. This was a famous National Academy of Sciences, Medicine and Engineering report in 2007. It was called Rising Above the Gathering Storm. The idea here was this: in a world where advanced knowledge is widespread, now you can't hold knowledge back. Every country of the world, if something happens in the US, you're all going to hear about it. Anything happens here, we're all going to hear about it. The news is traveling very fast. And there's low-cost labor is readily available. The US advantages in the marketplace and in science and technology has begun to erode. This was said in 2007. And look what's happening. This is the decline. Look at that line of China in terms of R&D share globally. And that was when that report was produced. So clearly, China is proving the point that that is true. And China is beginning to, really get active in that area. This is the US share of researchers and publications has declined. Total number of business researchers, academic researchers, government researchers, number of scientific papers, papers in the top 10%, papers in the top 1%. China is now clearly, beginning to take over. And believe me, in 1980, the economy of China and India were very similar. In fact, China at one time had a lower per capita than India. And of course, you can, in the last 2,000 years, for 90% of the last 2,000 years, India and China were the two largest economies of the world. So there is time for recovery, I believe. Look at this. The US's ability to attract top international talent has declined. Until recently, it was mainly drawing from India, but I don't know what's going to happen under the current administration. So, and again, talent is rare. I mean, the advantage of India, the percentage of talented people is small. So, I think Mashelkar wrote in one of his articles, if 2% are the high innovators in a population of 1.6 billion, 1 point whatever, you have a high number. If that talent is not utilized, they're going to either leave the country or they're going to rot. So somebody said brain drain may be bad, but brain in the drain is worse. That's the important thing to remember. So how are you going to change that? Excessive regulation is another major problem. I mean, I think unfortunately, India acquired a lot of its administrative bureaucracy from the British, highly regulated systems. I think less regulate. Look what's happening in the US. In the last 10, 20 years, our regulation has gone up, and that's starting to affecting our science. I think we need a lot more deregulation. We have to ensure science is ethical, that science is, human subjects are protected, all of that, but we need a lot more regulation. I almost feel, like for example, find a person, write a 4-page concept on the topic you're going to work for the next 4 years. Here's your money. We don't need the details of your project. You report to us what progress you're making. You have to make changes, you make it. Allow the flexibility. Fund the person, not the project. I think that sort of a model is going to be important. And again, look what's happening with excessive regulation. In the US, our young researchers, they spend 40%, 50% of their time on regulatory compliance. This is getting almost ridiculous. And this is definitely, and also the other problem is peer review. Yes, you need peer review, but you also don't need peer review because peer review forces everything regression to the mean. I mean, so what does peer review do? It forces low risk science. If you want high risk science, you need some other model. I mean, the peers in general, like for example, I showed you, if I was going by peer review, I would never have been able to, come up with the idea that no, diabetes in India is not because of insulin resistance, it might be insulin secretion. My early paper struggled, but that's the question. So do we all have to struggle, or can we have, some like investing in the market? You have some money in the CDE, some money in low risk stocks, some money in high risk stocks. Can you have that sort of portfolios for research? And depending on that, you fund it differently, you regulate it differently. Look at this. This is an independent assessment of high technology. Look what's happening. Whether it's artificial intelligence, advanced materials in manufacturing, energy and environment, quantum computing, biotechnology. I mean, look, China. China is beginning to take the space of science very, very rapidly in a very organized way. This was a recent paper. Nature has come up with a new index of leading universities of the world based on publications in top 20 journals. I mean, there are criticisms about the metrics, but according to that metrics, among the top 11, 9 of them are Chinese universities. So, so let me finish. Let's bring all the parts together to grapple the opportunities. Because I am a great believer, not by focusing on the problems, but by using crises as opportunities. I think we need a crisis. In 1990, when India had a crisis in 1990, it forced India to open the market. So a crisis is important, and I think, so maybe these crises are important now. Like I said, culture of collaboration and partnerships internationally and within nations, and I think a large country like India, there's been too many little silos. I mean, I'm not here to criticize anybody. India has 3 national academies. I mean, can they be collaborating together? Can they become more efficient? I don't know. I mean, it's not. I'm just asking a question. I mean, other countries don't have 3 academies. Can we be different? Transforming the science workforce is going to be extremely important. We have trained our scientists for a different era. So now scientists have to have an interdisciplinary mind. Of course, interdisciplinary does not mean that nobody needs to have a discipline. You are going to require the silos. You're going to require the theoretical physicists, the theoretical chemists. You're going to require them. But can we also create a larger cadre of people who can work across disciplines? And what would that require? What kind of degrees do we need for that? You know, we are talking about an MD, PhD in Bangalore, for example, at Indian Institute of Science. The system is difficult because, you know, the current structure doesn't allow that easily. So how are you going to change that? And you need expanded metrics of science impact. You need to balance the normal routine science that keeps, you know, makes small progress with paradigm shifts. If you're going to take paradigm shifts, by definition, your projects are going to fail. If you don't fail, you know, you should all read, Thomas Kuhn's famous book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. If you, all the paradigm shifts in science, whether Einstein's equation or the discovery of the internet, it comes through, you know, like they often say, if you were living in the world where there were horse carts, the normal scientist would have said, the next horse cart will be a little faster horse cart. Whereas the paradigm shift was, no, it needs to be the automobile. The next paradigm shift, no, maybe it should be an aeroplane. Maybe it should be the trans-atmospheric vehicle. So you require people also to be thinking of paradigm shifts. And I think that is an area that we need to focus on, I believe. Institutions have to reform to meet the opportunities. How you're going to do it, I don't have an answer. But I do believe institutions are set up for a different generation, for a different time, a different era. Many of these things, and we can get into the thing. Investing in science, finally, there is a role for government, philanthropy, and industries. And let me offer to you, this is a strategic document for science for the United States. This was recently updated. Can anybody guess what proportion of the US's knowledge economy is driven, overall economy, and not just GDP, but overall economy, when you add things like total amount of data, patents, everything else, what proportion of the US economy directly comes out of its R&D? Any guess? 70%. So it's at the head of the knowledge economy. 70. So the US damages its science and technology infrastructure. It's going to have a problem. And I think there is definitely a place for public investment in basic sciences, public investment in applied sciences, but also industry investment. Industry is not going to fund high-risk science. Industry is not going to science that doesn't produce something immediately. Industry is going to pick up on science and commodify its benefits. So public investment in basic sciences, public investment in theoretical sciences, public investment in applied sciences is extremely important. So to finish, I've said we need investment for research. Let me show you some data. Low and middle income countries on average seem to be investing between 0.13% to 1.5% of their GDP in research, compared to about 3 to 5% in high income countries. And America is closer to 5%. But a high percentage of American investment comes from private philanthropy and from industry. Yes, the government also invests. So, I was talking to the Director General of ICMR 2 days ago. He was saying, in India, if you need it, you need a lot more private investment to increase it. And look at India. I just corrected the figure today. India invests roughly less than 0.7% of its GDP, and China is now close to 3%. Okay, and for me, what is painful for me, India contributes to 25% of the global burden of diabetes. But when we did a review, research in Indian populations, whether in India or abroad, together is less than 1% of all diabetes research, which is a tragedy. And research is not just useful on its own. Increasingly, research investment correlates strongly with economic growth and health improvements, both. And for a country to move from low middle income country to middle income country to high middle income country, you cannot do it without investment in research. If you want to move from agriculture to manufacturing to knowledge economy, investment in research is important. And research is not going to pay off tomorrow. It's going to pay off in different ways. One new patent, one new discovery can be a $1 billion thing. That's where you need to think about it. It's a very different way of thinking. You can't do it on a balance sheet. It's something that is different than that. So I believe scant investment in research in LMICs, including in India, is a very big lost opportunity for science and the economy. Finally, I want to thank all the people that have funded all the work that we have done. This is a picture of my group and some colleagues in India taken here in Delhi some years ago. We've had funding from all kinds of organizations, mainly NIH, but also other organizations, including some from India Alliance, etc. Thank you, and I'm open to questions.
We should thank Professor Venkat Narayan for a fascinating lecture. It was really a sort of a mind opener. We have time for a couple of questions, perhaps. Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
Tell me your name and then, yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Muskan Gupta. Sir, I just have a small doubt. It's not a question. Like for cohort analysis, it was done between Asian and non-Asians. And the conclusion came that Asian people are suffering from diabetes, insulin resistant diabetes. And Western people are suffering from insulin deficiency.
No, it's
Sir,
opposite.
opposite.
Yeah,
Huh.
sorry, yeah.
Sir, so my question is like a small population of people from Asia has been migrated to Western country. They have lived there for 10 years, adopted the complete lifestyle. And then we forwarded with the same population of the cohort analysis. Will there be a change in their gene?
No, when we find, like, for example, I showed one of the slides of 5 US cohorts, and there we find that the South Asians living in the United States also their disease is far more similar to South Asians or Asians living in Asia compared there. So so they're over time some of their lifestyles changes. I mean, I do believe an Indian American in the US has a slightly better lifestyle when it comes to more physical activity, more of protein in the diet, more of high fiber diet, etc. But in terms of their genetic and their epigenetic and pathophysiological risk, they are more similar to people living here than the whites living in the United States.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, right there. Oh, you have a question too. Inko de do. Huh?
Good evening, sir. Thank you so much for this insightful lecture. It was really moving. So I have 3 questions. First of all, you talked about methylation. So I was asking that are there any ongoing studies that are aiming at erasing these methylations in the South Asians?
Not to the best of my knowledge, but yeah, that's for you to start a study there.
All right. And there's one more question that you mentioned that South Asians have more harmful fat, that is the visceral fat. So is there something to do with evolution and epigenetics?
No, we don't. I mean, clearly, we don't know why South Asians are depositing more fat in the liver. It may be because there might be genes that are directly involved with it. It may be because of the small organ size. But again, these are the kind of questions. These are the kind of questions we need to be answering.
All right, thank you so much, sir. And my last question is that you told that the science should be more interdisciplinary. So what are those tools that we as young scientists should focus on as of now?
I personally think the first tool is developing a sense of curiosity, for which you don't need anybody other than your own mind. The second tool, extend that curiosity to areas outside of your day-to-day regular curriculum. For example, I often joke that as a 5-year medical student, I was a very poor medical student. I hardly did well in my exams. But I spent those 5 years reading philosophy, religion, literature, poetry, and it became, so in my own time, I was doing a liberal arts education without knowing I was doing a liberal arts education. But that started helping me to develop a critical thinking. Reach out to people outside of your discipline. Don't live in your own echo chambers. Those are resources you can clearly use. And I think, and you will quickly discover, use the model, follow your question. I mean, it's not the discipline you belong to or the disease you're studying. Just follow the question. If your question takes you to the laboratory to answer it, go there. If it takes you to the community to answer it, go there. If it takes you to a physics group, go there. If it takes you to an engineering place, go there. Follow the question, and then acquire the facts to supplement. Use imagination and questioning first, and then collect the facts, rather than starting with facts.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, great. I'm very happy to see the students are asking the questions. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Hari Chandana. I'm from MSc Bioinformatics from Amity University. First of all, thank you so much, sir. Like, this was a very insightful session. And my question is, could you please share your insights on how AI and emerging technologies can be integrated into the diagnosis and treatment of type 2 diabetes, especially for borderline or pre-diabetic individuals who are in constant change of lifestyle?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think this is another wide open field. Currently, for example, there are data, early data suggesting that using AI, you can better predict somebody's risk of diabetes. You can better predict somebody's risk of a diabetic complication like, say, retinopathy. And those are some things that can be done right away. And there's also, for example, in the area of diabetic eye disease, there are certain AI methods to say who's going to respond to what kind of treatment. So there are some of those ideas that have come. In the field of cancer, there's a lot more advances in terms of precision. But I think, yes, AI would be a big place that a lot of things can happen. For example, you might also want to think in terms of AI not just for a disease, but as a model for multimorbidity. Like I said, by mapping the eye, the blood vessels in the eye, what's called oculomics, you might be able to predict diabetes, cardiovascular disease, dementia. Maybe some people will be more at risk for one thing. So there's a lot of scope for AI. A more aggressive potential area might be maybe, if you combine, say, smartphone technology or iPhone technology, whatever, which allows you to measure your measures, your blood pressure. Like I saw an app yesterday that measures your blood pressure, or measures your glucose, or measures your stress levels, or measures your food levels, and based on that, you connect it to an AI algorithm that gives you the proper education as to what you can do. There are all kinds of things you can do with it. So I think AI is going to be a major frontier, but I also want to highlight that we also need AI skeptics. AI should not be seen as the solution for everything, because maybe there are risks with AI that we are not aware of, and we should be open to it. And again, I can expand on it, but there are certain areas, like for example, when you get AI to write your papers, two problems happen. First, it prevents you from thinking. The advantage of reading and writing is that it forces you to think. So I would urge everybody, should write and read every day. And reading, and I say reading, and you want to read some kind of classics, a few pages of it. And there was a famous, a slight distraction. There was a famous paper in the science magazine called the 1 hour workday. They came across a professor who was highly prolific. And then everybody said, how do you maintain such level of prolificness? You must be working 24 hours. He said, no, I work 1 to 2 hours. I said, what do you mean? I set aside 1 to 2 hours of my best time of my day to work on the most important thing and to write. Like I wake up in the morning at 5 o'clock, 5 to 6, I'm working on that one paper. And in a month, it becomes a manuscript. So the idea that you need special time for writing is wrong. You need to build writing and reading into your routine. So coming back to AI, I think that is one danger of AI. If we over-rely on it, we lose our ability to think, which is maybe very important that we acquire. And the second thing, see, AI hallucinates the references. So the third thing about AI, the difference between AI and human intelligence or human creativity, AI doesn't have any constraints. So it comes up with all kinds of solutions that might be, so orthogonal or may not even work. So whereas human brain has constraints. So I think we need to move into a civilization where we combine AI, but not at the cost of being humans. Yeah.
Last question, perhaps. Yeah.
Sir, actually continuation,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Sir, as you said, like there are many apps to measure the diabetes. Sir, like how do you think how reliable those apps are?
Yeah, that's what I said. We need to work on the reliability. These are the kind of areas. I mean, this is an area, like I said, some things are reliable, some things are not. But these are the kind of areas. These are the kind of questions you should be asking.
Okay. Any last questions from there? Maybe. Yeah. Just for geographic justice. Yeah. Please.
Thank you, sir, for your lecture. I am Ekta Kukreja from Amity Institute of Nanotechnology. My question is, sir, nowadays, especially people living in Delhi are exposed to toxic elements and pollutants. So do you think that has an effect on genetics or beta cells that produce insulin?
Fantastic question. We've been studying, in fact, we've been mapping PM 2.5, ozone levels, etc., which are very high in Delhi, Chennai. And early papers are suggesting enhanced risk of hypertension, enhanced risk of diabetes, alterations of lipids, whether causality, etc., those are the kind, or there are genetic influences, those are exactly the kind of things we should be studying. I believe in countries like India, that is an area that deserves a lot more attention, both in terms of science and possibly also in terms of ways of reducing that level of pollution. There was a time, as a professor, when I had to look at the audience and say, can I get some girls to ask questions, or women now, can some boys ask some questions, please?
Actually, precisely on those grounds, I was going to suggest one of these boys who was a hands up. Yeah, maybe you in the back. Okay. Sure. Just on gender justice grounds.
Gender justice.
Good evening, sir. My name is Arjun. So, in your slides, you mentioned the various classes of anti-diabetic drugs. So, among the various classes of anti-diabetic drugs, which ones are currently considered most effective for the population, particularly for managing insulin resistance?
See, I think the most effective drug depends on that particular instance, the particular patient, the particular society. In general, the most commonly used drugs in India are, I don't practice in India, but so it depends. So I think the answer is it depends. I don't think there is a categorical answer as what is more effective. Everything depends on the kind of situation, what it's presenting, and depending on that, a precise assessment of what kind of drugs work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we can again thank Professor Venkat Narayan for a fascinating lecture. It was really as a theoretical physicist, I could understand the sort of depth into which their studies have gone and how much you've taught us about diabetes. Maybe Dr. Pandey, you led with some... Okay, so we come up on the stage now? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, there's a sort of remark from...
Okay, thanks, please.
Yeah. Observation more than...
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
First of all, students, let's give a big clap to our very distinguished speaker, Professor Narayan, for the immense contributions he has made in the field of diabetes. If you Google his publications, you would see all the the Q1 journals like Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine, British Medical Journal, and so many brilliant publications. And also thank you, Professor, that you are partnering with Indian institutions, Indian scientists. So we like to expand this cohort. And we would also, Amity University would like, so many brilliant students. 110 students have come from Amity University looking for partnership and collaboration. I just wanted to reflect on three things, if you can. See, now we have a huge database available today in terms of the etiology, pathophysiology, and also incidence and prevalence. Can you look at a multifactorial model in which you have genetic, epigenetic factors, nutrition, lifestyle, so many things put together with different weightage? And can you evolve a multifactorial model, which I think now it is possible with a huge database available, data sets which you have, and the publications available. So this is one suggestion I want you to reflect. The second is people are talking about type 3 diabetes, type 1, type 2. Now the one with cerebral syndromes, Amity University has also proposed type 3 diabetes, where you mentioned about dementia, and there are many other the cerebral factors which is also coming into a syndrome which could be put as a type 3 diabetes. So I want your comments. Third one is, can you reflect on the traditional systems of medicine like yoga, Ayurveda, medicine, which have the solutions for this? You talked about the other part. Can you also reflect on, can the traditional Indian systems of medicine can also play a role in terms of prevention, control, management, and treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you all hear me in my microphone? Okay, the first question, you're absolutely correct. Most of the models that have been developed so far have been linear models, so we take one thing, one disease, etc. But like you correctly said, the challenge now is going to be by the time you combine genetics, all the omics data, all of the variable data from the different lifestyle, all the socioeconomic factor data, and then you predict different diseases, different complications, it is computationally a very different animal. And this is where I think a lot more physicists, who are trained in thinking of structure and like in particle physics of integrated structures, we need more of them coming into biology. I think people who are trained in those kind of disciplines, people trained in computational biology, people trained in artificial intelligence, we need more of that. Because I think the future of a lot of science and society is one of complexity. And complexity is not single parts, but multiple parts interacting with each other, where you may not be able to predict everything, but everything relies on the basic assumptions. And then a lot of things emerge in society. I mean, for example, this conversation, we never know. An idea might have sparked, it might lead to something. So I think we need a lot more detailed complexity modeling. And I think this is where we need people from other disciplines. This is a classic example. Your second question was about type 3. I mean, yeah, the people have described Alzheimer's dementia as a problem with the brain's insulin receptors. So that's where it got the term type 3 diabetes. There's no question that diabetes seems to accelerate the risk of both vascular dementia and Alzheimer's dementia. We have a large cohort in India called the CARS cohort. And in 8,000 people, we are adding whole genome sequencing, the Alzheimer's biomarkers. And in 4,000 people, we're going to do imaging of the brain. And this is going to be probably one of the largest cohorts, to study brain. There's also a group in IIT Madras, led by somebody called Mohana Shankar, who have done mapping using 400 brain tissues to map the brain at the cellular level. The brain is a very difficult organ to study. It's a challenging organ to study. So I think all of this definitely needs to happen. Your third question is an important one. I think, there have been a few studies of yoga, for example, testing yoga or testing. It has shown positive benefits, definitely for mental health, certain physical health, etc. But I believe we need more organized effort and organized research in these areas. This is where I think we need to bring in people in those disciplines, but also subject it to the rigors of modern science. I think science is, I keep saying, science is science. There's no difference between medical science, biological science, social science, or Ayurvedic science. Science is science. It's a fundamental way of, and it's not the truth. It's a fundamental way of seeking the truth. So I think bringing those disciplines and subjecting it. Let's study. Let's understand. If you think Ayurveda works, let's understand the mechanisms. Let's understand how it changes the cell structure. Let's understand. I think that collaboration is going to be important. I think, but that's not easy, because there is suspicion on either side. People say, "Oh, you're imposing your methods on me." But I think then tell us what your methods are. Let's impose your methods on us. That's, I think.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Come, Dr. Pandey. Huh?
Thank you so much, sir, for such an captivating talk with your all expertise you had for so many years. As you have also mentioned towards the very end that public investment in basic sciences is necessary. So we all look forward to having a model and infrastructure where India also sees public investment and also private sector and commercial investments as well. And as sir also mentioned about the multifactorial model and the traditional Indian knowledge, we also look forward to it in our new education policy and maybe in other policy papers coming ahead in India. Thank you so much, sir, for your time, patience and your knowledge sharing with us. I now request Professor Sanjay Puri, Vice President INSA, to please present the honorary token of gratitude to our esteemed chief guest.
All signatures of Professor having been elected a foreign fellow of the Indian Academy. So that's, I think there's a tie of INSA that goes with it, and there's a memento that goes with it, and well, that's just a box, yeah.
Thank you very much.
As Puri sir rightly mentioned, it is indeed our honor that Professor Narayan is our esteemed INSA Foreign Fellow. To honor this, I request our Vice President again to please confer the INSA Fellowship scroll to him. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out time from your hectic schedule and marking this spectacular evening with your gracious presence. To conclude the entire program, I now invite Dr. Brajesh Pandey, Executive Director, Indian National Science Academy, to present the vote of thanks.
गुड आफ्टरनून, नमस्कार. सो शब्द नहीं है ये बात कहने के लिए कि किस तरह का लेक्चर था, और आप सभी लोगों के क्वेश्चन, और उसके बावजूद भी बहुत सारे हाथ उठे हुए थे क्वेश्चन के लिए. सो इसके बाद टी सेशन में निश्चित रूप से आपको इंटरेक्ट करने का और सारे क्वेश्चन पूछने का मौका रहेगा. इस तरह के लेक्चर जो कि सामान्य ज्ञान मैं कह सकता हूँ बढ़ाने के लिए हैं, और जो लोग डायबिटीज़ में काम नहीं कर रहे हैं उनके भी समझने के लिए, और एक जन सामान्य के लिए लेक्चर है. इसके लिए जो कि मेरे जैसा आदमी जो डायबिटीज़ और इन सब में बिल्कुल काम नहीं करता, बहुत सारा पार्ट समझ में आया. इस तरह के एक सभी के समझने लायक लेक्चर डिलीवर करने के लिए मैं चाहता हूं कि आप सभी लोग एक बार करतल ध्वनि से सर का स्वागत करें, धन्यवाद करें. तो इतना बढ़िया, इतना मुश्किल जो टॉपिक था उसको इतने अच्छे ढंग से हम सबके सामने प्रस्तुत किया. So on behalf of Indian National Science Academy, it is my privilege to extend our heartful thanks to everyone who has contributed to making this program, that is INSA Distinguished Lecture, a memorable and inspiring event. First and foremost, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Professor K.M. Venkat Narayan, Executive Director, Emory Global Diabetes Research Center, USA, and INSA Foreign Fellow for delivering such an enlightening lecture. Your insight and expertise have provided immense value to all of us present over here today. I would also like to convey my appreciation and regards to Professor Sanjay Puri, our Vice President, Resource Generation and Management INSA, and our all office bearers of their guidance and continued support in organizing this kind of session. A special thanks to our friend W. Selva Murthy. Because of his effort and his affection to INSA, we always fill our auditorium, even not having a academic institute. We are able to fill the whole auditorium with the curious, I can say curious audience. Thank you, sir. We acknowledge the MIT, Jamia Millia Islamia, Delhi University, Lady Hardin College for their participation in this lecture. Our sincere thanks to INSA staff, INSA officials who work tirelessly behind this scene. Sunil Jokarkar ji, Rajput ji, Karthik with their IT division, as well as Malhotra ji and Aditya Pilania, who has worked hard to make it successful. Other than this, we have, I can mention all the names, and everybody from INSA, they can consider I am mentioning their name. So one to all of them have worked hard to make this event successful. Finally, I would like to thank the viewer join us online via YouTube channels. Your participation reflects the growing reach and the impact of INSA program in public. Once again, my heartfelt thanks to everyone who have contributed to the successful program for today's event. We look forward to welcoming you to many more such lectures in coming days. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. I request everyone to please stand up for the national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
I now request everyone to please join us for a group photograph session near the staircase of the INSA main building, followed by refreshments. Thank you.